My people came to me, Dan Coates came to me, and some others. They said they think it's Russia. I have President Putin. He just said it's not Russia. I will say this. I don't see any reason why it would be, but I really do want to see the server. But I have confidence in both parties. So I have great confidence in my intelligence people. But I will tell you that President Putin was extremely strong and powerful in his denial today.
Mr. President, Robert Mueller said last week that Russia is interfering in U.S. elections right now. Did you raise that with Vladimir Putin?
You don't really believe this. Do you believe this now?
You said it last week. Did you raise that with President Putin?
That was just two of the times President Trump has publicly disagreed with his own intelligence officials over the fact that Russia has and is continuing to interfere with U.S. elections. Joining us now is staff writer at The Atlantic magazine, Frank Foer. His new piece for this month's issue is entitled "The 2016 Election Was a Dry Run." And Frank, you tweeted about the piece, quote, "I've been working on this since January. Russian interference is going to happen again, and the story of U.S. preparation is a maddening account of haplessness and Trump undermining well-meaning reforms. Sorry to add to the anxieties." Frank, there's concerns that many have raised about the next election and the president undermining it, impacting it in some way. And then, of course, there's the entire issue of Russia. What do you know about what they are doing at this point to interfere in the next election?
Well, in some ways, this is not dissimilar from coronavirus, where we have a big existential problem. We know a threat is out there and is likely to hit us, and the bureaucracy begins to prepare. The entire country knows exactly the plan. There's bipartisan consensus largely about the reforms that need to be in place to protect us. And yet it's the statements like the ones that you read at the top, you broadcast at the top of this segment, where Trump undermines everything that the bureaucracy is doing. He undermines all of the bipartisan momentum for reform. And so we're left in this position where we saw what they did in 2016. We've seen what they've done in European elections since then and in the midterm elections in 2018. So we know that their tactics have evolved, that they have this map of the United States electoral system. And in the 2016 election, people don't really appreciate that they probed the voting systems of all 50 states. And when and the vendors that sell the computers to counties and to states, and there are 8,000 electoral jurisdictions in this country. So there are countless vulnerabilities, and the Russians know them. And in 2016, they stayed their hand. They could have gone further. And the intelligence community is a little bit confused about why they didn't cause more mischief in 2016. And given that this president has essentially invited Russian mischief, and he's shown that there's no price to be paid for it, what is the reason for them not to go further? And they could probably do it in ways that would be essentially undetectable to our intelligence services.
Frank, I want to ask you when the Premier League will restart and Liverpool can be crowned the rightful champions of that league and of English football, but that question can wait. I'm curious, in this case, you talk about the decentralization of our electoral systems. You know, in Florida, there's 67 counties, and all 67 supervisors of elections can choose the way they're going to run their individual elections. Isn't that decentralization actually the United States' best defense against widespread manipulation from the Russians or the Chinese or the Iranians?
First of all, I don't want to know if you're actually wearing Liverpool pajamas as your bottom in this Zoom shot. But decentralization is an advantage in that the Russians can't strike one computer system and manipulate the aggregate tally of events, which is what they tried to do in Ukraine in 2014. But what they can do is that they can cause problems in places that create kind of an aura of suspicion around the outcome. And the problem that we face right now is that if Donald Trump were to lose this election, we can be sure that he will seize upon any sort of little thing that he sees go wrong and say that there's some sort of mischief happening, that there's something that's been done to steal the election from him, to discredit the election. So really, we're vulnerable to kind of a feather push from the Russians. The danger isn't that they will they'll knock out the entire result, or that they'll try to even change the tally. But what they could do is that they could hack, say, like the Wisconsin Secretary of State's office on election night and post fake results on there, and that those fake results will then cause Trump supporters and Trump himself to say that this whole election needs to be thrown out, or that somehow the official results are illegitimate.
Hey, Frank, it's Willie. Good to see you this morning. There was so much table pounding and cable news appearances by politicians saying after the 2016 election, everything we learned about it, we've got to stop this. They're already starting to work on 2020. We've got to put laws in place. We've got to put safeguards up so this never happens again. And as you point out in detail in your piece, it is happening again, as most people predicted. And Russians have gone right around whatever safeguards were put in place. In fact, when a representative of the Office of the DNI went and testified to Congress in February that Russia was up to its tricks again, you'll remember that President Trump quickly fired Joseph Maguire, the DNI at that point, for putting that message out there. So are there safeguards? Have anything been put in place? Has anything changed since 2016? And what has President Trump done to undermine some of that work?
So the Department of Homeland Security actually has done some very good work in that the states in 2016 didn't really take the Russian threat seriously. And when Jay Johnson, Obama's Homeland Security Secretary, went to the states and told them that they needed to bolster their security, they essentially accused him of trying to federalize elections. But since then, DHS has done various exercises with the states. They've installed some sensors on some of the state computing systems to protect those. So that's a positive. And the social media companies have actually done a decent job of shutting down some of the Russian organized, inauthentic campaigns to spread disinformation. So that's a positive. But then you point to the Joseph Maguire firing. And this is something that I think should be extremely troubling to all Americans, which is that when I went and talked to people on the Hill, on intelligence committees, you talk to people who served in the Trump National Security Council, what they say is that the best Russia hands in the intelligence community don't want to work on Russia-related issues because they're afraid of their work being politicized. They're afraid of getting fired for speaking truth. And so they've asked to be removed from working on the Russia issue. And when I asked Senator Mark Warner, the ranking Democrat on the Senate Intelligence Select Committee on Intelligence, he told me that he couldn't be sure that he could trust the intelligence that he was seeing and that the government was producing about Russia. And I asked him, if the Russians were executing a major campaign, would our intelligence communities report that? And he said he couldn't be sure. And so that to me is kind of at bottom the most terrifying thing about where we stand.
All right, we'll close by reading this part of Frank's report. Quote, events in the United States have unfolded more favorably than any operative in Moscow could have ever dreamed. Not only did Russia's preferred candidate win, but he has spent his first term fulfilling the potential it saw in him, discrediting American institutions, rending the seams of American culture, and isolating a nation that had styled itself as indispensable to the free world. But instead of complacently enjoying its triumph, Russia almost immediately set about replicating it. Boosting the Trump campaign was a tactic. Hashtag democracy, rest in peace, remains the larger objective. Vladimir Putin dreams of discrediting the American democratic system, and he will never have a more reliable ally than Donald Trump. A democracy cannot defend itself if it can't honestly describe the attacks against it. But the president hasn't just undermined his own country's defenses, he has actively abetted the adversary's efforts. Keep that in mind. The piece is in the new issue of The Atlantic. Frank Foer, thank you very, very much.
And Frank, you'll never walk alone.
Oh, my Lord. Okay. Up next, yes, all right, you two. Up next, a key model is raising its projection for the number of possible U.S. deaths from the coronavirus. And Rhode Island Governor Gina Raimondo will be our guest. Morning Joe will be right back.
Thanks for checking out MSNBC on YouTube, and make sure you subscribe to stay up to date on the day's biggest stories. And you can click on any of the videos around us to watch more from Morning Joe and MSNBC. Thanks so much for watching.